At the start of the film, I woke up in a small house and was cared for by a girl. She introduced herself as Eruruu and said she was the one who rescued and brought me here. However, I couldn't remember who I was or why I had a mask on my face. The next morning after waking up, I realized that no matter what, the mask couldn't be removed. Eruruu's mother then came to visit and asked if I was feeling better. She also didn't know who I was. As for why the mask couldn't be removed, she said there must be some explanation. She advised me not to think too much and to focus on resting to recover. A little later, Eruruu brought me some porridge to help me regain my strength. I thanked her family for their kindness. Then, I noticed someone peeking at me from behind. Eruruu's mother brought me her son's clothes to wear. When I wanted to go for a walk, she told Eruruu to accompany me. Just in case I fainted again outside, someone would bring me back. The peeking gaze reappeared and Eruruu introduced the person to me. It was her younger sister, Eruruu. Eruruu found it a bit strange that I was wearing their father's clothes. Their father had passed away, and their mother also died after giving birth to Utawarerumono. I felt a bit awkward wearing something so important, but Utawarerumono wasn't too concerned. While walking, I still felt uncomfortable being carried by Eruruu like that. But she said that country girls like her were very strong, so I didn't need to worry. After that, I noticed a swing and accidentally bumped into it, but she immediately pushed me down, proving that she was right about being very strong. Right after that, a man named Teoro arrived to pick me up. Teoro realized I was the stranger brought to the village's schoolhouse. This place is a shelter for many people because it is very peaceful. The place is also quite small, and everyone lives happily together. Currently, some houses need to be repaired after the recent earthquake. I vaguely recall something for a moment, but then dismiss it. Immediately after, Teoro's wife, Sopoku, came looking for her husband, thinking he was just being lazy at work. So she whispered in his ear about the dull return. She also noticed that Eruruu seemed to have found someone she liked, but Eruruu insisted that Sopoku misunderstood, as she was just helping a patient. The two of us then continued to walk around the village. I saw the peaceful scenery of this place and felt it was very pleasing, as was Eruruu herself. While contemplating under a tree, Eruruu apologized for dragging me around so much, but since I was the one who wanted to go for a walk, she didn't need to feel guilty. Eruruu wanted me to ponder a little longer before we returned, but then she heard a commotion from within the village. So she told me to stay there and contemplate, while she went to see what was happening. Upon returning to the village, she met her old friend Nuagai, who was now working for the court and collecting taxes. Nuagai grew up in the same village, but now that he had power, he was extorting heavily, demanding taxes, and announcing that as long as the village paid enough, the authorities would protect them from war. Nuagai had also liked Eruruu for a long time and wanted to take her with him, but she refused, saying she didn't need wealth or status. I arrived then and told Nuagai to stop, but Nuagai arrogantly declared that he was a relative of the local lord and that a mere beggar like me had no right to interfere. Eruruu stood between the two of us and asked Nuagai to let it go, but upon learning that Eruruu and I were living together, he became enraged, accusing me of being the third party between him and Eruruu. When Eruruu explained the situation, Nuagi calmed down for a moment, but then I provoked him further, causing Nuagi to lose his temper and start causing trouble. However, I am not someone who is easily bullied. Angrily, Nuagi left. That afternoon, upon returning home, Eruruu told me that Nuagi wasn't always like this, but I said that when people are young, they haven't learned greed yet. As for Nuagi, upon his return, he took his anger out on a nearby statue. The surrounding birds suddenly flew away, and his pet became frightened by a strange, terrifying sound and ran off. At this time, Eruruu's grandmother also heard the sound coming from the forest and called the entire village to gather. She suspected that someone had desecrated the forest and toppled the statue. The villagers looked towards me, but Eruruu stood up for me because she had been with me all day. When Eruruu woke up, Eruruu had to take her sister back to her room so that others could continue their discussion. I understood why I was being suspected. I then asked the village elder about the spirit of the forest, and she explained that it was a divine beast that protected the forest from divine punishment. They had a duty to do something to appease the beast's anger, otherwise they wouldn't be able to enter the forest anymore. Someone suggested they capture the beast, but the village elder said it was extremely strong and intelligent, and confronting it would only bring injury. A villager then returned to report that the statue had indeed been knocked over. They couldn't rebuild it now because it was raining very heavily. I felt that the gods would not be angry over such a trivial matter, although I didn't know why I felt that way. However, the village elder told everyone to stay indoors at night and avoid going outside. When I returned to my room, Eruruu was changing my bandages. I suddenly had a headache and saw strange, fragmented memories, but Eruruu told me to calm down, saying my memories would return soon. The next morning, I went with Eruruu's grandmother, Eruruu, and a group of men from the village to survey the damage to the statue. Indeed, the statue had been completely destroyed, and their only choice was to build a new one. Some people began to feel scared and wanted to leave, because not long ago a nearby village had been attacked by a fierce beast. The village chief said that the beast only became active at night, so they could safely rebuild during the day. But they also had to avoid making too much noise so as not to awaken it. After that, they rebuilt a new statue and hoped it would appease the beast's wrath, at least a little. As they were preparing to leave, I noticed a few beasts nearby. When we returned to the village, it was almost evening. The village chief advised the men to return home soon to their wives and children. Teoro also asked me to keep an eye on Eruruu's family. Then they noticed Eruruu was also nearby and seemed to dislike me. Teoro told me not to worry too much about it. Suddenly, a sound from the forest echoed again, so everyone returned home and bolted their doors. However, during the night, the beast of the forest still found its way to them. I heard screams from outside and wanted to do something. But the village chief said that if I went out now, it would only cause more casualties because humans could not fight such a strong beast. A long time ago, the village chief's older sister sacrificed herself as a to lull the beast to sleep for a long time. But just then, it suddenly became quiet outside, urging me to go see what was happening. I went outside and saw the beast attacking a villager's house and eating someone inside. It rushed towards me, forcing me to grab a nearby tool to defend myself, but its body was too stiff to be pierced. Then it attacked and threw me away. Eruruu quickly ran out to protect me, but at that moment, the beast stopped, and as the rain started to fall, it stopped running. Returning to the village chief's house, the entire village was saddened by the loss of a family. However, I told them that I had found a way to fight back. I picked up a feather from the beast near the statue and put it in water, and upon contact with water, the feathers became weak. Therefore, water must be the beast's weakness. I want to fight it instead of enduring it any longer. But the villagers still showed fear. So I decided I would be bait to lure the beast so they could trap it. The villagers then dispersed, but Eruruu was worried about my decision to be bait. I said I was an outsider, so no one would care if I died. But Eruruu said she considered me family and didn't want me to get hurt. Hearing this, I promised myself I would return, because I also considered her family. The next morning, I discussed my plan with the entire village. I wanted them to follow my plan, and assured them that I would find a way to escape. Although they knew that killing the forest god would incur a curse, I believed that no one wanted to continue living in fear and one day become food for that beast. After that, they went into the forest and built a trap to lure the beast into. Teiro and I went together to the beast's den, lured it out, and led it towards the trap where many villagers were ambushing. On the way, the beast attacked me, but I fended it off with the steel fan the village chief had given me. After that, we arrived at the trap and waited for the moment the beast jumped in, then pulled the rope to collapse the trap, drowning the beast in the water. When it tried to climb out, we all rushed in and stabbed it repeatedly. Finally, I delivered the finishing blow, killing this creature. The group then returned to the village safely, and everyone rejoiced for no longer living in fear. I returned the fan to the village chief, but she decided to give it back to me. However, at that moment, Eruruu realized her younger sister had gone missing. The entire village searched for Eruruu and finally found her returning from the forest, carrying a baby tiger cub. The villagers worried that as it grew, it would become as ferocious as its mother. But I don't want any more killings and believe that when all creatures are born, they are pure. They decided to adopt the tiger cub, and that night, the whole village held a ceremony to bid farewell to the mother tiger. The village chief now sees me as part of the family and gave me a name, Hakuoro. Eruruu realized it was her father's name. Eruruu is now more open and no longer avoids Hakuoro. After some time in the village, Hakuoro taught Teoro and the villagers how to cleanse the land of bad luck. Suddenly, they were summoned to the village chief's house because someone from another village came asking for help. The village chief opened her heart and accepted them. Although the village's food supply wasn't enough to feed so many people, she believed war was coming and they would need unity to survive. That night, Eruruu told Hakuoro that her grandmother had been taken by some men. He immediately set out to find her, asking Eruruu to watch over Eruruu at home. Following the tracks, I was ambushed from behind by an attacker, but I quickly escaped and realized I was surrounded. Just as both sides were about to fight, the village chief appeared to stop them. The young man introduced himself as Oboro, and when Hakuoro explained why he was pursuing them, the village chief revealed that she often visited a sick girl and didn't want to bother Eruruu, so she kept it a secret. Then, she invited Hakuoro to come along, and they went together with Oboro to a camp. Oboro still had doubts about Hakuoro, but the village chief spoke up for him. After that, they met Yuzuha, a girl who was ill and couldn't see, but her other senses were very keen. She knew Oboro had returned, sensed the village chief's visit, and felt Hakuoro was following behind. After examining Yuzuha, the village chief found she only had a slight fever and called Oboro outside to give Hakuoro and Yuzuha a chance to talk. Yuzuha wanted to hear Hakuoro's story, but unfortunately, due to his memory loss, he couldn't tell her much. The two chatted pleasantly for a while, until Oboro told Yuzuha to go to sleep, and then Hakuoro and the village chief left. When they returned home, it was already dawn. The village chief explained to Eruruu why she had been out so late at night, and Eruruu felt relieved to know Hakuoro was with her mother. That day, the village surprisingly received a large amount of food, helping them to survive for a while longer. And on a rainy night not long after, Oboro's man arrived, urgently requesting the village chief's presence. Hakuoro went with her, and upon arriving, they found Yuzuha in critical condition. After examining her, the village chief realized Yuzuha's condition was very serious and immediately called for grinding tools to make medicine. She used a portion of her precious medicine, mixed with herbs, for Yuzuha to drink, helping her stabilize temporarily. However, the village chief warned that this condition would recur many times until Yuzuha passed away, and her precious medicine was only enough to help Yuzuha a few more times. Oboro was heartbroken, not understanding why heaven was so cruel to his sister. Not long after, he secretly snuck into the army camp to steal supplies, but was soon discovered. Although he escaped from the soldiers, he was spotted by a commander. Determined, Oboro searched for a battle, but the commander noticed that Oboro had never lost a battle before. Still, with a reckless and arrogant attitude, the commander allowed Oboro to charge forward, then knocked him down with a single blow. Oboro wanted the commander to finish him off, but the man refused, saying Oboro's life meant nothing to him. The commander then left, and the next morning, Eruruu and Hakuoro found Oboro unconscious in the forest. After bandaging his wounds, Oboro said he owed Hakuoro a debt and would repay it someday. Hakuoro didn't want any repayment. He just wanted Oboro to return to Yuzuha. Oboro said he owed Hakuoro because he feared his reckless actions might drag Hakuoro into trouble. Indeed, not long after, the Imperial Army arrived with Nuagaki. He announced that the previous night, someone had broken into the Imperial Treasury, and they suspected the village was harboring the thief. The village chief stepped forward, accusing them of going too far. The official also owed the village chief a kindness for once curing him, but they declared that her kindness could not outweigh the crime of the intruder. Eruruu then threw a rock at Nuagaki, and a cub bit the man's mount on the leg, causing it to panic and knock the official off. The soldiers tried to attack Eruruu, but the village chief stepped in to stop them and was struck down with a sword. The villagers, enraged, forced the official and his soldiers to retreat. The villagers then gathered at the chief's house, praying for her recovery. Teoro and his wife urged everyone to go home and let her rest, but the village chief knew her time was short. She spent her final moments with her two grandchildren, telling them to live in harmony and love, for they only had each other, one older and one younger. She then called Hakuoro to her, entrusting the care of her two young grandchildren to him. She said she had lived long enough and was ready for the next journey, with no regrets or attachments left in this life. After that, the woman let out a sigh. Hakuoro then went to inform Oboro of her death. Overwhelmed by rage and sadness, Oboro blamed himself for her death, but refused to forgive her killer. He asked Hakuoro to take care of his siblings, then left alone. Oboro stormed the imperial palace, slashing the guard at the gate before being overwhelmed when the official appeared with a group of guards. He was subdued and captured immediately. Meanwhile, back in the village, everyone gathered, and Teoro announced that the village chief had entrusted everything to Hakuoro, making him the new village chief. Oboro's siblings pleaded for his release, saying that since the village chief had saved everyone, they couldn't stand by and do nothing. Hakuoro saw that everyone understood the risks, but still chose to follow him. He ordered them to arm themselves with farming tools and storm the imperial palace together. As the new village chief, Hakuoro personally led the assault to boost morale. The previous commander approached Oboro again, saying he had spared Oboro just so Oboro would return and throw it away. He spoke to Oboro about the battle outside, jeering that their small group would soon be crushed. When asked why they didn't live quietly, Oboro replied that living like that wasn't truly living. That would make them unworthy of facing their loved ones. Fascinated by Oboro's conviction, the commander decided to see how his words would play out, leaving a sword, cutting one of Oboro's sash, and freeing him before leaving with his men. With Oboro's return, Hakuoro's forces once again surged and fought their way to the official's chambers. Backed into a corner, the official had nowhere left to run, and Nawagi was shocked to learn the village chief was dead. He fled in panic while the guards charged, only to be swept away in an instant. Hakuoro then stepped forward and dealt with the officer. After that, he assessed the damage and wondered if what they had done was truly worth it. He then asked Oboro if he felt any regret for punching him, because it was Oboro's reckless actions that drove them down this path. Not long after, the regular army would soon arrive to eliminate them. Hakuoro also blamed himself partially for letting things get out of control. Afterwards, he met Eruruu and leaned on her, but only to ponder and think more about long-term strategies. Meanwhile, the commander returned to meet the Lord and reported on the villagers' uprising. The Lord immediately ordered him to quell the rebellion to avenge his brother, whom Hakuoro had killed earlier. The commander had no choice but to obey. During this time, Hakuoro had the villagers build defensive walls to prepare for the upcoming battle. Eruruu and Eruruu came to help, but during a break, Hakuoro told the sisters they should return soon because this place would soon become a bloody battlefield. However, Eruruu understood this. Therefore, both sisters insisted on staying. Hakuoro, worried about being a village chief, was too disappointing. But in reality, if the two sisters left, the logistics department would be short-handed. Not long after, unexpectedly, Oboro's group arrived at the village seeking refuge. Oboro said Hakuoro had saved his life, so he was willing to give that life to Hakuoro to use as he wished. But Hakuoro did not want a reckless person. Therefore, Oboro officially accepted Hakuoro as his brother and vowed to serve him with all his might from then on. That night, Eruruu and Eruruu went to Yuzuha's place to take care of her in place of the village chief. At the same time, Oboro told Hakuoro that the reason they all came was Yuzuha's decision. She had resolutely come to help at all costs. This is the first time Yuzuha has made a selfish choice for herself, and she prepared herself to be shunned if she became a burden. But Hakuoro would never do that. At that time, he was writing letters to neighboring villages to ask for help for the uprising. He didn't care about numbers, he just needed a few people to respond. A few days later, the villagers began to train and fight and use weapons like soldiers. One night, while walking with Eruruu, Hakuoro suddenly discovered Eruruu sneaking near the food storage. She wouldn't let anyone in, and when Hakuoro looked, he was shocked. The tiger had grown too fast and had eaten a large amount of food, but he overlooked it because the tiger seemed to cherish Eruruu, and he didn't want to provoke it and risk a dangerous outcome. The next day, Hakuoro set out to seek support from other villages. He took Oboro and his two sisters with him. When they approached a new village, the four of them saw smoke rising ahead. They went to check and found the village destroyed and completely burned, the villagers seemingly all dead. Immediately after, the commander's forces appeared. He introduced himself as Banawi and admitted he had destroyed the village. Banawi said Hakuoro's actions would lead to destruction, and this was his first warning. The two sides then clashed. Oboro fought Banawi's subordinates while the two young girls held the line so Hakuoro could face Banawi. But Hakuoro's group was soon overwhelmed by numbers. At that moment, Eruruu and the tiger arrived to break the encirclement. The enemy knew the power of the forest god. Therefore, Banawi intentionally retreated after asking Hakuoro two questions. The first was whether Hakuoro truly believed his actions were righteous. Hakuoro replied that if the land of the Fonts existed, that's where he belonged. The second question was simply to ask Hakuoro's name. When Banawi left, Hakuoro realized the destroyed village was not caused by Banawi, and their skirmish was a test, not a serious battle. However, the destruction of this village will serve as a warning to others, urging them to join Hakuoro in seeking hope for the future. The reason Hakuoro does not consider himself righteous is because his uprising began with harming a loved one. If he had endured and not revolted, none of this would have happened. Oboro told him never to doubt his ideals again. Hakuoro thanked the tiger and Eruruu for coming to their aid, but next time, he wanted Eruruu to wait for him at home. Meanwhile, Benawi returned to report to the Lord and learned that the village he had just set foot in had been ordered by the Lord to be destroyed as a warning to the rebels, and the person who personally carried out the massacre was Nuagai. Due to his failure, Benawi was demoted, and Nuagai was appointed to replace him. A few days later, Nuagai visited Benawi's vassal, Kuro, suggesting that a talented person like Kuro belonged on the battlefield, not guarding here. Nuagai promised him a better environment, but Kuro said he would only serve and follow Benawi. At that moment, Benawi was wondering what Hakuoro was doing. After that, he told Kuro to prepare supplies so they could depart on their mission soon. As for Hakuoro, in recent days, the number of people joining them has increased significantly. He had only one condition: they had to absolutely obey his orders. And of course, they all agreed. That day, the villagers unexpectedly brought a suspicious man that Eruruu had captured while he was peeking over the fence. Oboro thought he was a spy, but the man declared he was just a merchant selling to a regular customer. He said he always did business in the capital, but today the guards had changed. Hakuoro told him that they had just taken over this place. Oboro still found him suspicious and wanted to kill him immediately, but the man said if they didn't believe he was a merchant, they could search him freely. Hakuoro then wanted to see what he was selling. So the merchant laid out his goods. Among them were many types of herbs that Eruruu recognized very well. Besides medicinal herbs, he also carried toys and accessories. Hakuoro told him that this place would soon become a battlefield, but the merchant didn't believe it, because everything around still looked peaceful. Hakuoro then asked Eruruu to prepare some food to entertain the guest. As he escorted the merchant outside, the man pointed out that Hakuoro was still too trusting. If he were truly a spy, Hakuoro might already be dead. But when Eruruu came to escort him, the merchant had no choice but to leave. Meanwhile, Benawi was assigned the task of capturing and guarding a strategic point. At that moment, they heard someone had trespassed, so they split up to pursue. Benawi and Kuro caught the intruder, but it turned out to be an innocent person trying to escape the war, so they let him go. Benawi then met the merchant to buy the information he had just obtained. As for Hakuoro, they identified the castle Benawi had just captured as an important location for recruitment. Just then, the victim arrived to seek help from Hakuoro. After learning that the castle had been captured, Hakuoro decided to recapture it and set off the next morning. After a day of marching, that night, Hakuoro ordered the entire force to ambush outside the castle. When he saw that the enemy soldiers were tired, he signaled to attack and led the charge himself. His forces broke through the walls, but Benawi quickly organized a counterattack. Oboro led a unit to storm inside and created a breach for the demolition team. They successfully entered the castle, and Hakuoro unexpectedly encountered Benawi there. Oboro charged into battle with Kuro while Benawi rushed towards Hakuoro for a direct confrontation. Hakuoro soon noticed his forces being pushed back, and he himself was knocked to the ground. But at that critical moment, Oboro's two sisters arrived with reinforcements from another direction. Surrounded, Benawi ordered his soldiers to abandon the fortress and retreat in an orderly fashion. Hakuoro, not wanting to be outdone, split his army into two fronts to attack simultaneously. Hakuoro was praised for this strategy, even though it was a risky move. If the reinforcements had not arrived in time, they would have been wiped out. Hakuoro is the type of person who never fights unless he is certain of victory. When they returned victorious, everyone rejoiced except for Eruruu and Eruruu, who felt a little sad, because Hakuoro now belonged to everyone, not just the two of them. At this time, Benawi was being reprimanded by the Lord for his failure. While Nuagi had just returned after destroying another village, Benawi was unhappy that Nuagi's target had nothing to do with the rebellion. The Lord declared that they needed to eliminate all potential threats that could help the rebellion grow stronger. But this contempt for commoners angered Benawi. He decided to leave the Lord's service only to be imprisoned. After that, Hakuoro continued to lead his troops into battle and achieved victory in all the eastern regions surrounding their base. Although they gained more allies, Oboro was still dissatisfied that these new allies were just opportunists who followed whoever was in power, first the Lord and now them. However, Teoro didn't care, saying that more troops were always good. That night, Eruruu saw that Hakuoro was still awake and asked him for a favor, to spend a little time visiting Yuzuha. Hakuoro then went to see Yuzuha, and as the two talked, they listened to the sounds of the night sky. Oboro suddenly arrived with the news that something had happened. Nuagi had once again led his troops to attack another village. He ordered his soldiers to kill all survivors to prevent any future revenge. Although the soldiers were hesitant, Just as they were about to act, Hakuoro's army arrived to stop them. They quickly suppressed Nuwaba's forces, forcing them to retreat. Immediately after, another group of soldiers organized by Hakuoro rushed in from behind, surrounding Nuwaba's forces. His men fled, leaving him behind. He was quickly captured by the villagers and brought to the city for judgment. Afterward, Eruruu came to meet Hakuoro and encountered Nuwaba again. Everyone decided to let Eruruu decide Nuwaba's fate, whether he should be executed or imprisoned, but she chose to release him. No one could persuade her, so they followed her decision and let him go. After that, Hakuoro's army continued their relentless assault, gradually sweeping away and pushing back all of the Lord's forces. Finally, they surrounded the capital, where the final battle would take place. On the day of the assault, the entire army gathered around the Lord's capital. When the Lord heard the news of the enemy's arrival, he remained calm, saying that everything should be left to Nuwaba. However, since Nuwaba had disappeared for several days, they had no choice but to let their soldiers handle it themselves. The army was deployed hastily throughout the city, and the poorly organized defense system was quickly seen through by Hakuoro, who had prepared a counter-strategy. Afterward, he ordered the vanguard to charge and clear the way. The army advanced, crossing the moat and setting up ladders to climb the city walls. Immediately after, another unit rushed in to break down the gate. When the gate opened, Hakuoro commanded the entire army to charge in. His forces began to overwhelm and gain an advantage over the enemy. In the chaos, Kuru seized the opportunity to rescue Benawi. However, instead of fleeing, Benawi decided to fight this battle as a commander. As Hakuoro and Oboro charged in, they encountered Benawi and Kuro. Oboro rushed forward, but Benawi blocked his attack and noticed how much Oboro had improved. As the enemy began to approach, Oboro moved away to deal with them. Benawi and Hakuoro briefly fought before Hakuoro's army gradually advanced further into the city. Kuro then stepped in to cover Benawi, allowing him to retreat. Benawi rushed to the Lord's quarters and informed him that they had lost the battle. After a moment of panic, the Lord requested Benawi's help to escape, but Benawi said that only those who can fly can escape now. If the Lord did not want to be mistreated by his people, Benawi was ready to escort him out immediately. Meanwhile, Oboro quickly jumped in and fought on Hakuoro's behalf. At that moment, Benawi decided to take the Lord's life. Without a word, he lowered his weapon. When Hakuoro arrived, the Lord was already dead. Benawi told Hakuoro to take care of the country from now on, and expressed his desire to die with the Lord. However, Hakuoro stopped him, saying that since the country had changed hands, Benawi's duty was not yet over. Benawi then went outside with Hakuoro and announced that the Lord had died. With no reason left to fight, the remaining soldiers laid down their arms. Thus, the two sides made peace, sat together in contemplation, and shared a meal. Benawi also began to have a more favorable view of Hakuoro. Meanwhile, at the temple, they received news that another country had been defeated and overthrown. When the priest heard the name of the new country, he was very surprised. It was the name of the former village chief's wife. At that moment, the saint came to inform the priest that she would personally visit this newly established country. The priest worried that the land might still be unstable after the war, but since the saint had decided, there was no choice but to agree. A few days later, Hakuoro and his people decided to stay in the capital, as Teoro and the villagers chose to return to their homeland, believing that where they were born would also be where they died. A few days later, Hakuoro began to urge the reconstruction of the capital. Nearby tribes soon came to express their respect for him. Not long after, Eruruu discovered the appearance of an envoy. According to Benawi, they were envoys from a high-ranking tribe, a group comparable in size to a temple, who sought to establish relations with every nation. Although they rarely intervened in wars, they would intervene if they deemed it necessary. The priestess and her attendants then came to meet Hakuoro. The priestess introduced herself as Othari, and the man beside her was Munto. When they moved to Hakuoro's private room for further discussion, Eruruu brought tea to serve the guests. Munto initially thought it was a type of common, low-quality tea, and that Hakuoro was being disrespectful, but after tasting it and finding it delicious, he immediately retracted his words. Othari requested Hakuoro personally guide her on a tour of the city being rebuilt. Although Hakuoro was willing, Benawi insisted that he should stay at the mansion to handle administrative work, so Eruruu would be their guide. All three noted that this land had just escaped domination, and the people could now finally live in peace and rebuild their lives. Not long after, some children passed by and tugged on Munto's sleeve before running away. Meanwhile, Hakuoro was still buried under his mountain of paperwork. That evening, all three visited Eruruu's room, and upon realizing Eruruu was a healer, she shared that she herself had once wanted to study medicine to save people. However, upon realizing her responsibilities, she had to abandon that dream. Eruruu, on the other hand, explained that she didn't become a healer solely to save others. Her grandmother had been a beloved doctor, and Eruruu wished to be like her. At the same time, Hakuoro went to the lake to enjoy the fresh air, where he saw a girl with butterfly wings playing on the water's surface. When he turned away for a moment, she suddenly disappeared. Returning to his room, Hakuoro discovered that the same girl was sleeping on his bed. Startled awake, and seeing him, she used a temporary shape-shifting spell to hide. However, since the spell only lasted for a short time, she was discovered again. As she fled, she bumped into Eruruu's tiger and, frightened, ran into a basket. The tiger approached and knocked over the basket, but Eruruu arrived, called her tiger back, and also said that she wanted to sleep with Hakuoro. All three then appeared and found the winged girl, who turned out to be her sister, Kamyu. Worried that her sister had caused trouble, all three offered to take responsibility. But Hakuoro wasn't angry at all, and even welcomed Kamyu to stay as a guest. The next day, Hakuoro's workload had increased even further. Oboro and Kuru arrived to argue about how the army should be reorganized, while Kamyu went to find Eruruu, hoping to befriend her. However, Eruruu kept running away from Kamyu. Still, Kamyu refused to give up and continued to pursue her. She tried to act friendly and cheerful, but Eruruu continued to avoid her. When Kamyu met Hakuoro again, she asked him how to befriend Eruruu. He gave her some advice and asked her not to tell anyone that he was taking time off to relax. Meanwhile, Banawi returned to the office and found Hakuoro had dozed off. Kamyu then brought beeswax and honey as a gift for Eruruu. Eruruu wanted Kamyu to eat with her. Although Kamyu was initially worried, after tasting its deliciousness, she finally succeeded in befriending Eruruu and Yuzuha. Around that time, Banawi met Oboro and asked about Hakuoro, but Oboro knew nothing. At that moment, Munto popped out from his hiding place. He was tied up by Kamyu. He asked the two if they had seen their princess, but Banawi noticed Kamyu, Eruruu, and Yuzuha playing outside with the tiger. The three of them spent a fun day playing together before returning to sleep in the same room that night. At that time, all three came to see Eruruu and told her that she knew about Eruruu's grandmother. Her grandmother was a legendary figure, someone no doctor in the field did not know. Although death was said to return all beings to the gods, it was still a sad thing. Eruruu felt sad when talking about her grandmother, but she knew she couldn't dwell in that sadness, because her grandmother would certainly not want her to be like that. The next day, when Hakuoro went to feed the tiger, he found all three girls sleeping on its back. He silently hoped that these peaceful days could last forever. After a few days, Olthari and her entourage of shamans left, satisfied that life in this land had changed for the better. Kamyu did not want to leave, but promised that she would visit Eruruu and Yuzuha again soon. In the following days, another delegation arrived to meet Hakuoro. Unlike the friendly emissaries from the church, these men carried a decree from Lord Shikarekim, King Niue, demanding land that Hakuoro had conquered be placed under their dominion. It was clear that their intention was to annex the territory, causing Oboro to immediately reach for his weapon. But Hakuoro stopped him. Still maintaining a calm and diplomatic demeanor, he expressed his willingness to serve while inviting the emissaries to stay for a few days, so that he and his council could discuss the matter. A few days later, they escorted the Shikarakim delegation out of the capital. Oboro was angered by their arrogance, but Banawi explained that Shikarakim was a powerful nation, and its army and territory were at least 10 times larger than theirs. However, Hakuoro was not idle. He instructed Banawi to begin reinforcing the border defenses. When the delegates returned and reported to Niue, they mocked Hakuoro as a cowardly leader, too afraid to challenge them, who even hosted a feast for their delegates. However, Niue saw through Hakuoro's plan. He realized that Hakuoro considered them mere performers, and he did not need such a man. He ordered his forces to prepare for battle. That very night, Shikarekim's army launched the first assault. Kuro rushed back to report. Apak Fortress had been attacked and fallen. A war council was quickly convened. Hakuoro commanded the border troops to remain in Kinohan, and Shishimaru to gather at Horo Fortress under Banawi's command. His orders were simple: hold for 3 days to give Hakuoro time to prepare. As for Oboro, Hakuoro gave him a secret mission. That afternoon, Hakuoro assigned some tasks to a merchant before he left. After that, Eruruu came to see him. She knew they were preparing for war and had heard that Hakuoro was researching a forbidden medicine. She told him that her grandmother had forbidden the creation of such medicine because it could bring disaster. However, Hakuoro asked her to trust him and wait for his plan to unfold. The next day, Shikarekim's army arrived at one of the fortresses, but Hakuoro's troops had already long since retreated. At Horo, Banawi ordered his men to gather arrows and large stones to reinforce the walls. Not long after, Hakuoro began marching to the battlefield, this time taking Eruruu with him. That night, Shikarekim's army arrived and surrounded Banawi's fortress. They began their assault, but Banawi commanded his men to fire arrows and drop heavy stones, preventing any enemy soldiers from climbing the walls. Regarding Oboro, under Hakuoro's orders, he infiltrated the enemy camp and placed something in their food supply. Hakuoro watched from afar, and at that moment, he noticed Eruruu had followed him. She said she had a bad feeling and directly asked him about his true intentions. He explained that humans need food and drink to survive, and without them, they cannot live. What he referred to as forbidden was gunpowder. As soon as he finished speaking, the enemy's food supply exploded. That was the answer to Eruruu's question about what was forbidden. Hakuoro had used a secret substance, combined it with another substance to create a devastating destructive power. A giant pillar of flame erupted from the warehouse, a brutal yet effective strategy. Hakuoro admitted he didn't want the two sisters to witness such a sight, but circumstances didn't allow for it. As the enemy tried to salvage supplies, Hakuoro's forces launched an ambush and achieved complete victory. However, what Hakuoro didn't expect was for Niue to appear on the battlefield. Niue completely overwhelmed Hakuoro, but the raging flames interrupted their battle. Niue said this was just a greeting and they would meet again, then retreated. Meanwhile, Banawi's unit also retreated after receiving the signal. On a stormy day, Oboro and Kuro were dispatched to the coast to investigate a report of a shipwreck there. However, upon arrival, they found numerous soldiers killed, and at the center of it all was a woman with bloody hands. She soon lost consciousness, and the two men took her back. Hakuoro knew the ship that was wrecked was Natonku, from a southern region of the same name. According to Banawi, it was a slave trading ship, and the woman they saved was one of its prisoners. Oboro imprisoned her, believing it was unusual for someone to be able to kill an entire platoon single-handedly. However, the woman had already escaped and appeared before Hakuoro. She introduced herself as Karulao, and instead of treating her as an enemy like Oboro and Kuro, Hakuoro invited her to stay and asked Eruruu to tend to her wounds, saying they would decide what to do with her later. After the meeting, Banawi asked if Hakuoro intended to keep Karulao. He feared that Natonku would use her as a shield to attack, but Hakuoro was more concerned about Shikarekim at this time. Not long after, Eruruu and Oboro argued again. She wanted to grant Karulao freedom while he suspected her of being a spy. After hearing their dispute, Hakuoro agreed to release Karulao, but only within the confines of the city. Banawi and Oboro thought he was too lenient with Eruruu. After that, Karulao met Eruruu, who was curious about her bracelet. Instead of revealing it was a slave's collar, Karulao said it was just jewelry. She even made Eruruu a flower crown, which delighted the girl. Eruruu offered to prepare a bed for Karulao, but she refused, saying she was used to sleeping in ashes. Her only request was for alcohol, which she drank a lot of. In the following days, Karulao often wandered around the city. Meanwhile, Kuro felt bored because the warriors were not strong enough to be his opponents. Seeing Karulao, he challenged her, but she ignored him. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Olthari came to meet Hakuoro and requested to become his Yamoro. At that time, Eruruu also led Karulao into the meeting, and upon seeing each other, Karulao and Olthari reacted as if they were old friends reuniting. The two then sat down and drank alcohol together. Hakuoro discussed with everyone whether Karulao should join the army. He believed that since Shikarekim was targeting them, they needed to increase their forces. Omoro will handle the diplomatic and external matters, and everyone agrees to accept Karulao. She then appeared and appointed herself, suggesting that if they wanted to test her strength, they could fight her. Oboro and Kuro eagerly volunteered, but Banawi said he would take on this fight. The two went out to spar, and once the battle began, Karulao displayed overwhelming strength as her speed and power were superior. However, none of her swords could withstand Banawi's strength, and shattered every time they clashed with Banawi's weapon, the third sword. the battle was halted. Not long after, a merchant arrived with a colossal weapon that Carulao had ordered. It was incredibly heavy, and only she could lift it. She swung it once and shattered a colossal boulder. After that, no one had anything to complain about her anymore. At that time, all three returned after visiting other lords. She brought news that they were ready to attend the signing ceremony for a long-term alliance agreement. To prevent Niue, they needed the support of the surrounding nations. With their help, Shikishim would not dare to take any rash actions during this time, giving them more time to prepare. Not long after, all the lords had arrived. All three swore an oath before everyone, then they successively came forward to sign the agreement. At that moment, a disturbance broke out outside. It was Teoro who rushed in. He said their village had been attacked and the enemy forces were entering the city. Hakuoro suspected it was Shikerechem, but he was not sure. Hakuoro immediately ordered everyone to prepare. He asked about the villagers, and Teoro said they had evacuated, urging him to hurry. Everyone then set out for battle, while Teoro went inside to rest, exhausted. Outside, Hakuoro heard loud noises. He ordered the gates opened, allowing the enemy to flood in. As they advanced, logs hidden beneath the ground emerged, tripping the soldiers and causing them to fall forward. Oboro's two younger sisters commanded the archers to shoot them one by one. Meanwhile, inside, blood began to flow from Teoro's body. He didn't seem to have much time left. At that moment, his wife and villagers came to take him away. Seeing them, he smiled weakly and entrusted everything to Hakuoro. Outside, Hakuoro was horrified to see the enemy rushing forward like madmen, throwing away their lives without hesitation. When only the last soldier remained, he smiled faintly and said that it was not over yet. Their killing had no purpose, it was just for fun. That night, everyone gathered around Teoro's corpse. Eruruu, unaware of his death, kept trying to wake him up. Then Kuru returned after scouting the village and reported that the entire village of Eruruu had been annihilated. Both Eruruu and Eruruu could not accept it. The gentle younger sister, unable to face the truth, was forced by Eruruu to take a sedative. Hakuoro did the same to Eruruu to help her rest. After that, he gathered everyone for a meeting. From their clothing, Banawi identified the attackers as warriors from Kuka. Oboro wanted to counterattack immediately, but Hakuoro told him to calm down. There was not enough evidence, and they needed to investigate further. That night, while deep in thought, Carulao came to invite him for a drink. Hakuoro still couldn't understand why those soldiers never retreated and simply rushed to their deaths. Carulao gently explained that they were already dead. They had accepted death from the beginning, so they had nothing to fear. What Hakuoro should ask himself, she said, was what he did to make them willing to die to kill him. Of course, he had no answer because he had lost all his memories. He didn't even know who he really was. The next day, all three reported that the attack last night had terrified the lords, causing them all to withdraw from the alliance. Hakuoro suspected that everything had been orchestrated from the beginning. Then there was news from the island that Hakuoro had sent to Kuka. All of them were annihilated, with only one survivor left to deliver the news before dying. This event pushed Hakuoro to his limit, and he ordered the army to prepare. The campaign began immediately with the entire army mobilized. However, during the march, they were ambushed and surrounded by Kuka forces from all sides. Banawi immediately commanded a defensive formation. However, from the enemy commander's words, Hakuoro felt something was wrong. They called him a demon and a traitor. A fierce battle ensued between the two sides. But with the appearance of Carulao and her fearsome greatsword, the Kuka soldiers faltered. One of their generals, Tuka, recognized Carulao's overwhelming power and ordered a retreat. Even after they retreated, Hakuoro could not shake off his doubts about whether their words were true. Later, upon returning, everyone advised Hakuoro to reflect. Everyone except him had their own worries while he fell into a dream. Shadows surrounded him, and that general appeared again, calling him a demon, a traitorous brother. As the man swung his weapon towards him, Hakuoro woke up. Eruruu was by his side to take care of him. Although he was still confused about his true identity, she reassured him that everything would be all right, as he was now everyone's leader. Meanwhile, Oboro, still burning with a desire to avenge Eruruu's village, secretly led his troops to follow the Kuka army. They soon clashed with Tuka. Since there was only one enemy, Oboro said he would handle it himself. However, his opponent was too strong and completely overpowered him. Tuka did not finish him off. Instead, she said something about standing on the side of justice, and that those who follow the demon Hakuoro would never be able to touch her before leaving. Returning injured and in pain, Oboro was mocked by Kuro. However, Kuro also reported that he had found the enemy's base, but by the time they arrived, the enemy had retreated. Banawi explained that the Kuka army excelled in mobility, using swift and decisive tactics. The second major concern is Tuka. She belongs to the Even tribe, a minority ethnic group in the Central Plains known for their legendary swordsmen who will sacrifice their lives to protect what they believe is right. This seems to be related to Hakuoro's lost memories. With Tuka among the enemy ranks, victory will be difficult. When Eruruu brought tea, everyone sat together for a while before returning to the war council. Kuka is a vast, barren area, but there is a ravine that divides the land into two. Crossing it will take quite a lot of time. According to the intel, the enemy always disappears around that point, suggesting there might be a bridge. While everyone strained their eyes searching, Eruruu pointed to its location. It turns out she and Kamyu had secretly followed the enemy's tracks. This made everyone worried, but Eruruu apologized and gave Hakuoro a bouquet of flowers, so no one blamed her. Once the bridge's location was confirmed, they began their march the next day. They found it quickly thanks to Eruruu and the tiger. However, Tuka had anticipated this and set up an ambush. Before the battle began, she declared that anyone serving the demon god was a beast, enraging Oboro and Kuro, who charged forward and annihilated the Kuka soldiers until only Tuka remained. Hakuoro stepped forward and asked why she called him a demon god, but she dodged the question, merely stating he had taken countless lives and his sins were unforgivable. As she charged forward, Karulao stepped out to face her. Wielding his greatsword, Karulao easily pushed Tuka back to the middle of the bridge, then delivered a powerful blow that shattered it. When the battle concluded, everyone returned. However, that night, Hakuoro was still haunted by Tuka's words. Eruruu came to his side. They drank and talked together. Hakuoro feared that he might indeed be the murderer who killed his wife and child, that what Tuka said might be the truth. But Eruruu reassured him that she believed in his purity and would stand by him no matter what. Meanwhile, the people began to feel uneasy, thinking that since Tuka and the Kuka warriors fought for justice, Hakuoro might truly be a demon. He continued to manage political affairs and listen to Banawi's military reports. While Eruruu grew increasingly worried, as he drank more and more each day, he felt fear. Fear of himself, fear of his true self. His hands trembled uncontrollably, but a gentle hug from behind by Eruruu soothed his fears. She told him that she would always trust him, that no matter who he was, he would always be Hakuoro. The next day, Hakuoro set aside his work to spend time with Eruruu and Eruruu. He asked why she always supported him so much, and she replied that it was because they were family. At that moment, the tiger and Eruruu playfully jumped onto Hakuoro, and he laughed with them. Seeing his radiant smile, Eruruu finally felt at ease. But the peace did not last long. News arrived that the Kuka army was preparing to attack. Hakuoro immediately returned to command and ordered everyone to prepare. This would be the final battle. However, he did not summon all the troops to the battlefield. He ordered Eruruu and the tiger to stay behind to guard the castle, while the rest marched with him. Not long after, the two sides met on the battlefield. Without hesitation, Hakuoro signaled the attack, and the enemy, unafraid, charged forward as well. The two sides quickly clashed. Tuka and the general charged into Hakuoro's forces seeking revenge. When they discovered him, both rushed forward, but Kuro quickly stopped Tuka. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. Meanwhile, the general continued to charge straight at Hakuoro. Seeing this, Hakuoro retreated to lure him in. Tuka realized it was a baby and tried to follow, but Karulao and Oboro blocked her path. This was Banawi's plan to give Hakuoro and the general a chance to talk privately. Surrounded, Tuka was forced into a defensive stance. However, she was not one to give up easily. Exploiting a momentary lapse in Oboro's focus, she suddenly accelerated and escaped. When Karulao attacked, Tuka quickly jumped high to evade him. After that, they decided to let her go. Meanwhile, Hakuoro was trying to talk to the general about his identity, but the man refused to listen and continued to attack. This forced Hakuoro to knock him off his mount to compel him to talk. Upon learning that Hakuoro remembered nothing, the general burst out laughing, saying that even if he had forgotten, he could never erase his guilt. His blood-stained hands were proof of that. A man who killed his wife and child. What else could he be but a murderer, he said. Hakuoro looked at his hands as strange memories began to flood his mind. A dark aura then enveloped his body, startling the general. But before Hakuoro could do anything, the general was struck down by Niue. The true mastermind behind everything was now clear. After sowing more distrust in Hakuoro's heart, Niue departed. Tuka arrived just in time to witness everything. She realized she had been manipulated like a puppet from beginning to end. After the battle, everyone returned. Although technically a victory, no one felt happy. Meanwhile, Niue's army was advancing to attack them. Throughout the subsequent battles, the Shikirichim forces repeatedly ambushed and devastated villages in Hakuoro's territory, with Oboro always leading the charge to intercept. Banoe reported that, although they had won many small skirmishes, the Shikirichim army had now set up camp on the border, and dozens of villages had been destroyed. Enraged, Oboro loudly declared that they should invade Shikirichim to avenge the destroyed villages and the countless innocent lives lost. He believed this was the only way to return the evil of an enemy 100 times over. However, Hakuoro remained calm and cautious, making a completely opposite decision to focus solely on defense and strengthen border patrols. This caused strong opposition from Oboro, who could not understand why Hakuoro chose such a seemingly cowardly path. But Hakuoro's decision was final and unchangeable. At that moment, Ulthari interrupted, taking Tuka with him. Tuka was prepared to be punished, believing her death could atone for the sins she had unintentionally caused, even if it was all just a tragic misunderstanding. However, Hakuoro proposed a different way to atone. Instead of taking her life, he returned a precious item to her and tasked her with bringing the remains of King Orika-kan, whom she once served, back to his homeland. Hakuoro explained that King Orika-kan was not an enemy, but merely an unfortunate victim misled by an evil mastermind, the true source of all malice. Hakuoro's kindness deeply touched Tuka, making her feel deeply indebted to him. But just as their conversation ended, an urgent message arrived. The Shikirichim army had once again crossed the border to continue their invasion. Hakuoro and his commanders, including Oboro and Kuro, immediately set off for battle, leaving Tuka behind to fulfill her mission. On the front lines, the arrogant Shikirichim forces advanced towards a village they intended to burn to ashes. They were unaware they were walking straight into a trap. The Tusukuru army, under Oboro's command, ambushed them and launched a coordinated assault with the red and green units firing volleys of arrows, creating a deadly hail. Immediately after repelling that assault, another report arrived, this time from the western border. Shikirichim is launching a large-scale surprise attack. On the western front, the Tusukuru forces are once again outnumbered, but they witness the terrifying power of a lone warrior, Keruruu, who single-handedly sowed chaos among the Shikirichim ranks and forced them to retreat. At the enemy base, the true mastermind, Niue, encountered a samurai commander from Kuka who wished to join his ranks. Instead of welcoming him, Niue ordered the man taken to a secret location, where a scientist was conducting gruesome experiments harvesting materials from prisoners. Niue grew impatient and showed particular interest in Hakuoro, seemingly waiting to see the true form of Hakuoro. The war dragged on. Shikirichim's attacks intensified, and the conflict turned into a calculated war of attrition. Hakuoro realized the enemy's strategy. Small skirmishes repeated to wear down the physical and mental strength of Tusukuru, luring them into a desperate final assault. Once again, Oboro requested a counterattack, but Hakuoro firmly refused, explaining that with an enemy force more than 10 times larger, a direct confrontation would be suicide. He revealed there was only one way to win, a secret plan he could not yet reveal, for fear the enemy would know, and asked everyone to trust him. After the council, Hakuoro confided in Eruruu about the burdens and doubts that weighed on him. He just wanted to protect the ones he loved. However, the relentless war had pushed the nation to a greater catastrophe. He felt lost and didn't know where he was going. Eruruu lifted his spirits with absolute faith, vowing to trust him no matter what. Her words became a great source of spiritual strength for Hakuoro. On the battlefield, Hakuoro's intelligent tactics continued to pay off. They lured the enemy into a trap they had prepared, inflicting heavy losses. However, each victory felt incomplete. Although they won the battles, they were losing the war. Exhaustion and weariness were evident on the faces of each soldier. Niue, on the other hand, was overjoyed, believing Hakuoro was cornering himself, and ordered relentless attacks to crush them. The horror of war was apparent in the Tusukuru army. Exhaustion and casualties mounted, and supplies dwindled. Even Eruruu collapsed from fatigue. Finally, the decisive moment arrived. Niue ordered a full-scale assault with a single command: burn everything and kill everyone. Facing this, Hakuoro revealed his plan, a desperate gamble to lure the entire Shikarekim army into Tsukuru territory, completely leaving their country undefended, then dispatching an elite Tsukuru force to attack Shikarekim Castle and take Niue's head. A miscalculation occurred as enemy units advanced unevenly, disrupting the initial plan. But Hakuoro adapted immediately. He dispatched Banawi and the cavalry to the west to cut off enemy supply lines, while he, Oboro, Kuro, and Karulao faced the forces pouring over the border. He even mobilized the still mobile wounded for the next battle. The battle was fierce, and Hakuoro himself was wounded. But just as he was in danger, Tuka suddenly appeared. She had returned to repay Hakuoro's debt. According to Evan's custom of repaying with honor, her appearance marked a turning point in the war. She exposed Niue as a deceiver who manipulated King Orikakan, shaking the morale of a portion of the enemy forces. Amidst the chaos of battle, a personal tragedy unfolded as Eruruu tried to save a dying mother and child. But the woman did not survive, leaving behind a heartbreaking reminder of the war's brutal cost. After the battle, the Shikarekim forces temporarily retreated. However, Tsukuru suffered heavy losses. Half of Oboro's unit was annihilated, and countless villages lay in ruins. Knowing the enemy would soon return with full force, Hakuoro realized there was no other choice but to carry out his original plan to the end. He decided to personally lead a commando unit, Karulao and Tuka, his two strongest warriors, in a campaign towards the enemy's castle. Meanwhile, Banawi, Oboro, and Kuro remained to command the main defense line. It would be a race against time, a final showdown, with the fate of an entire nation dependent on whether Hakuoro could kill Niue before everyone else was annihilated. After the fallen were laid to rest, Hakuoro and his small but determined force set out on a mission that was almost suicidal in its nature, to end this bloody nightmare. On their way, Banawi and his comrades reached the nation's border, but a thick fog enveloped the land, making it impossible to determine the enemy's position. However, Eruruu, with her sensitive senses, felt their presence and warned that they were very close. As the fog slowly dissipated, a magnificent sight unfolded. A colossal Shikarekim army, at least 50,000 strong, stretched to the horizon and facing Banawi's forces. Tasked with holding the line and drawing the enemy's attention, Banawi understood perfectly what was at stake. His mission was to hold the line at all costs, to protect, and never to charge in recklessly. For doing so would mean immediate annihilation. Meanwhile, deep within Shikarekim territory, Hakuoro, along with Eruruu, Karulao, and Tuka, began their infiltration of the enemy's castle. With Tuka leading the way, she quickly and silently took down the guards, paving the way for the party. Not long after, Karulao joined the fray, demonstrating her overwhelming might. As they ventured deeper inside, a trio of enemy generals appeared. The three, claiming to be brothers, declared they would take Hakuoro's head and begin a feast of destruction. Karulao chose to stay behind to face all three by herself, urging Hakuoro and the others to proceed, promising she would deal with these insects herself, leaving Hakuoro only an apology for entrusting her with this task. However, it seemed two of the three brothers decided to pursue Hakuoro's group, leaving only Amiro to fight Karulao. But she quickly stopped them, refusing to let anyone pass. They boasted that their true strength would only be revealed when all three fought together. However, even when facing Karulao directly, they were still arrogantly confident. Facing two of them at once, Karulao displayed an astonishing calm and decisive will. When they warned her that she couldn't win by running, she turned their words into a weapon by feigning retreat. She picked one off guard, then unleashed a brutal attack with all her strength focused on a single target, killing him instantly. The remaining two, stunned by her power, could only call her a monster before being swallowed by Karulao's rampage. Meanwhile, Hakuoro and Eruruu finally reached the throne room. But what awaited them there was no ordinary battle. Niue, the mastermind behind everything, appeared with a wicked grin and unleashed his pets, the greatest warriors from the nations he had conquered, now transformed into soulless husks driven by bloodlust and servitude. Niue explained that he had merely awakened the beast within them. However, none of them could truly satisfy him. He believed they were merely tools to awaken the true beast. The one he was referring to was Hakuoro. At that moment, Karulao, having finished dealing with her opponents, arrived just in time. She and the others charged into battle against the horde of monsters, forming a wall of steel to shield Hakuoro. Karulao roared that if beheading them had no effect, they should rip them apart. She urged Hakuoro to move forward and finish Niue once and for all. Eruruu, filled with fervent determination, declared that she would accompany Hakuoro. She wanted to witness the path he chose with her own eyes. With no other choice, Hakuoro faced Niue directly. The latter awaited him with sick delight. Niue taunted Hakuoro as his pet, and when Hakuoro offered him a chance to surrender in exchange for his life, Niue laughed madly. To him, war was like a grand hunt. One had to prepare meticulously, wait for the bait. And in the end, there were only two choices: eat or be eaten. Then, to further ignite the cataclysm of his own making, Niue performed an unimaginably insane and wicked act. He commanded his nation to burn, turning Shikarekim's capital into a sea of fire. Hakuoro and Eruruu could only watch in horror as the city turned into a sea of flames. They heard the cries of innocent people being burned alive. In his madness, Niue declared that everyone would believe Hakuoro had done this, that he was the monster who burned countless innocent lives to ashes. This drove Hakuoro into a rage. He roared that he would never forgive Niue, but Niue only became more excited, reveling in Hakuoro's rage and hatred. He then revealed an even more sinister truth. Everything that happened, the capital was burning. All the deaths in the ensuing battle were sacrifices to nurture the beast within Hakuoro. He accused Hakuoro of bringing disaster, saying that if Hakuoro wanted to curse someone, he should curse himself. Pushed to the brink by Niue's wickedness and accusations, the rage within Hakuoro finally erupted. A primal, vast, and terrifying power awakened within him, turning him into something else entirely, a beast, just as Niue wanted. His eyes glowed with an eerie light. His body was enveloped in a torrent of immense power. Eruruu could only recoil in horror as Niue laughed ecstatically, shouting that he had waited for this moment for a very long time. Hakuoro roared that he would destroy Niue, and the two clashed in a final battle atop the burning citadel. Niue's sword swung with wild abandon, his excitement reaching its peak as he called Hakuoro his final creation, reveling in the sensation of fire burning his flesh. But Hakuoro, fueled by the sorrow and hatred of thousands of lives destroyed by Niue's madness, unleashed a world-shattering force. He roared, demanding to know if Niue was satisfied, if this was truly the end he sought after sacrificing so much. With a final, devastating blow, Hakuoro completely overpowered and killed Niue. In his final moments, Niue seemed almost content, acknowledging that his judgment had been correct, that Hakuoro was indeed the supreme beast. He invited Hakuoro to eat his flesh, fulfilling the law of survival that he so fervently believed in: eat or be eaten. And then Hakuoro completely transformed into a monstrous creature, tearing Niue into 100 pieces. When he finally awoke and returned to human form, everything was over. Below the castle, Karulao and Tuka had cleaned up the last of the monsters. They could only look up at the devastating destruction the battle had left behind. Meanwhile, on the border, Benawi and his troops watched the castle collapse in a sea of flames. They knew their commander had won, but at an immeasurable cost. The blood feast was over, but the scars it left would never fade. Not even a month had passed since the battle with Shikarekim ended. Reconstruction efforts progressed rapidly, and the fields once ravaged by war transformed astonishingly before their eyes, a testament to humanity's indomitable will to survive. On an inspection tour, Hakuoro, along with his companions and the villagers, especially the children, recognized him and greeted him joyfully. They even promised that one day they would be strong enough to fight alongside him. However, Eruruu gently told them that when they grew up, there would be no more wars, so they wouldn't have to fight. Hakuoro agreed, advising them instead to help their parents so that life could soon return to normal. Afterwards, during a council meeting, post-war issues were discussed. For Kuka, Tsukuru would send a delegate to assist in the reconstruction of their government, a decision that Tuka, representing Kuka, gratefully accepted. However, the situation in Shikarekim was much more complicated, as their capital had been completely burned down and only about 10% of the population remained, making reconstruction extremely difficult. Although the initial plan was to annex the territory into Tsukuru, Hakuoro decided to abandon the old capital, believing that the survivors should move to a new land without the ill reputation of Niue's reign. Nevertheless, the ravages of war and the burden of the decisions made still weighed heavily on Hakuoro's mind, leaving him exhausted. Seeing this, Eruruu offered to massage his shoulders. In those quiet moments, Niue's final words echoed in his mind, calling him a beast that brought disaster. That as long as he existed, war would never end, and he hallucinated that his hands were stained with blood. Meanwhile, life in the castle continued at its own pace. Although Tuka was provided with a comfortable room, she remained extremely respectful and was fiercely protective of Hakuoro despite his rejections. At the same time, Oboro and Kuru were caught by Eruruu trying to sneak snacks to go with their sake, lightening the mood with their laughter. Not long after, everyone's attention shifted to the training grounds where Oboro was having a sparring match with Banawi. Oboro showed considerable improvement with his fast and powerful attacks, but Banawi, calm and strategic as always, easily deflected them, always staying one step ahead. In the end, Banawi skillfully trapped Oboro and won the match. He then offered the valuable advice to always plan 2 or 3 steps ahead and never underestimate your opponent. Despite the loss, Oboro's progress was acknowledged by Banawi. And to celebrate, everyone organized a feast in the middle of the day. Laughter and cheerful voices returned once more, filling Hakuoro and Eruruu's hearts with warmth. That's all for this installment. Goodbye. See you in the next video.